Today's guest is Shannon Petrovich, a licensed clinical social worker, addiction counselor, and board-certified diplomat with over 30 years of experience helping individuals and families heal from trauma, toxic relationships, and addiction. She's the author of Out of the Fog, Into the Clear, and the creator of the popular YouTube channel Therapist Talks, where she shares insights on navigating narcissistic abuse, emotional resilience, and personal growth. Through her private practice in Tucson, online coaching, programs, and masterclasses at healfromtoxicrelationships.com, Shannon empowers people to break free from destructive patterns and reclaim their lives with clarity, strength, and compassion. Thanks very much for being with us, Shannon.
Thanks so much for having me, Ken.
Yeah. Well, let's jump into it. You've been helping thousands of people, break free from toxic relationships. Why? What draws you to this work?
It's interesting. I think when we decide what we want to be when we grow up, it has so many complicated answers. And I think when I was younger, it was wanting to be a veterinarian or a doctor. And then I realized that I was extremely squeamish and I really had a fascination for the emotional and the mental health and what makes people tick internally. And so I ended up going to grad school in social work and becoming a clinical social worker. And over the years, I had done a lot of different kinds of things. But about 6, 7 years ago, I realized I really wanted to share with a wider audience, but I didn't really want to write a book. So I saw that everybody was on YouTube, and I thought, at least I could share. I really want to share some of the strategies and insights I've gained over the years. And there's so many millions of people that will never have access to therapy. And so wouldn't it be nice if they could have little tidbits that I've learned and kind of grow from there. From there, it became really clear that the thing that people struggled with most was relationships, and then became even more focused on narcissistic and other abusive relationships. And then I decided, okay, I got to write the book. So then I did write the book because in a 10-minute or 20-minute video, you can't really help a person go from struggling and lost in the fog to really living a rebuilt, clear life.
It's amazing. The talk about narcissism has really amplified in the last number of years, but you were at the cutting edge of that. What drew you to understanding, talking about, trying to work through dealing with narcissistic people so early before everybody else arrived?
Well, it's really funny because 37 years ago, my first job, even before grad school, was in a battered women's shelter. So I had a draw to it back then. And I think because there was a little bit of chaos in my family, it wasn't violent or anything like that, but just wishing I knew why people were so bitter, resentful, argumentative, toxic. And so I think, our journey always draws us to begin with. And then, but back in the day, we didn't talk about narcissism. And it has become sort of this buzzword over the last maybe 10, 15 years, not a long time. And I think now it's becoming overused and also very much weaponized. I've heard, with some of my clients, their very narcissistic partner calls them narcissistic to try to get them to back off of their boundaries. And so we have to be really careful about how we use the word. And people confuse narcissism with high self-esteem. It's really not. In one of my videos, I talk about a hot air balloon. And a narcissist is very much like that. They're empty internally, and you have to keep pumping hot air into them to keep them afloat. And if that hot air stops, then they implode and then explode. So if you think about that emptiness, and they need constant adoration, constant internal, feedback from others, and just that in order to keep them intact. Somebody with actual self-esteem isn't like that. They're solid, they're kind, they're caring, they're empathic, they're humble because they don't have to be boastful and blowing up their own image.
So you talk about your title is Out of the Fog and Into the Clear. Speak about that.
So FOG is an acronym that has been around for a little bit: fear, obligation, and guilt. And when you're lost in the fog, and I'm also a sailor, and so when I got a hold of that and I started to write the book, I thought, oh man, I totally relate to this. If you've ever been sailing and suddenly the fog descends, you literally don't know which way is up, down, right, left, in, out. You're scared to stay still because something might hit you. You're scared to move because you don't know what you might hit. And the only thing that you can do is look at your radar if you have one. And so being lost in the fog of a toxic relationship is very much like that. And fear is one thing that keeps you stuck there. You're afraid of what might happen if you move. You're afraid of staying still. Whatever, obligation you're feeling under, whether it's you're married or you're got a kid together or you've just got a few years into this relationship, it's hard to pull away from that obligation. And then the guilt, the narcissistic person will always use this button to make you feel guilty. And so whatever happens, it's always your fault. And it's always your guilt to carry.
You use a lot of different modalities. Cognitive behavioral therapy, EMDR, motivational interviewing. How do you decide where you're going to go with a client?
Well, there's a lot of art and science behind that. And I think the 37 years of just doing it. But yeah, I think you have to have a lot of tools in your tool belt. And that's why sometimes people don't get what they need from a therapist or a coach because a lot of people are doing coaching just off of their own personal experience. Well, that's all well and good, except every person is different and every person's experiences are different. And if they need something else that you didn't have in your tool belt, then you're not really doing them a service. So the EMDR is a wonderful trauma recovery tool. A lot of science behind that. CBT has been around forever, cognitive behavioral therapy, and DBT kind of adds in that self-calming, a set of strategies, which I really believe in. Bessel van der Kolk is a psychiatrist who's kind of on the leading edge of trauma recovery, and he talks about all of these things, the DBT and the EMDR, and in general, sort of movement, breathing, and touch, and how healing those modalities are. So I think you have to have a lot of tools, and I just sort of intuitively navigate that with each client. Part of what I love about my work is it's fascinating to figure out how to help each person.
So you mentioned Bessel van der Kolk. If you were going to recommend to anybody, a way to understand a little bit more about trauma, to enter that world, what would be one or two people or works to check out to enter that world? Could be a YouTube video, could be a book.
Yeah, there's so much. And I always say, sort of find what works for you because a book that I might read and love, somebody else can't get through it. And same reverse. So I love Bessel van der Kolk's The Body Keeps the Score, Gabor Mate's The Myth of Normal. Brene Brown was kind of on the leading edge of all the shame stuff, which we realized later is trauma. And so those are the main ones that I like to recommend to read. I think it's really neat for a lot of people to find out from Bessel van der Kolk that the way so a lot of people will say really horrible victim blaming things like, oh, well, you're just comfortable in that kind of relationship because you grew up that way. That's a horrible simplification. It's a horrible blaming the victim kind of a thing. And it's not comfortable. Holy crap, it's not comfortable. But there are templates that we create in childhood. So, whatever's going on in childhood, we create a story, a narrative, and a template for the rest of our lives. And if we don't heal those old events and those old templates and change those old templates, we will keep creating the same relationship with different names and faces on that person. So, yes, we do recreate some of that stuff from childhood, but it isn't like an A equals B kind of a thing. It's a complicated thing that we create. And I think that word template is much healthier than you're comfortable in toxic relationships. So if we look at how each person sort of internalizes and stories that chaos or trauma or whatever, that's what we bring forward. So if in childhood you realize that, oh, well, if I keep everybody happy, then life is better, or I feel safer, Or if I fade into the woodwork and I'm just completely frozen, that's how I stay safe. So, or if I act crazy, then everybody stays away from me and I'm safe. So, those different templates, same family, right? Same chaos or trauma or whatever's going on. But those three different internalizations and narratives that those three different kids created create very different lives. All of them not very healthy. So one might be that typical scapegoat who's, doing drugs and being wild. Another is that perfect people pleaser. And another is that completely frozen part of the wallpaper person.
So you basically said that your YouTube channel was really an effort to expand reach. You've reached a lot of people through that. What's been the most effective? Is there something in particular that you see has the best reception?
Well, it's funny. It was going to be just a general mental health thing because there have been a bunch of high-profile suicides in the world, and I really felt just such compassion for the millions of people, like I said, who would never have therapy. And there's so many basic things about anxiety and depression that most people don't know that I felt like I could share. So it kind of started there. And then I did one on domestic violence, and I called it Domestic Violence Narcissistic Rage in Action. And that really sparked a lot of interest and people just messaging and commenting and saying, help me with this, help me with that. And that's where I sort of spun off into more of a focus on toxic relationships. But what I realized too is that people don't recognize the toxic relationship that we have within ourselves. So it's really important to start there in the healing process.
So speak a little bit more about the toxic relationships, and somebody's in that, they need to break free. Where's the starting place?
So in my acronym CLEAR, CLEAR, the first step is clarity. So one of the things that's true is that we have different parts of our brain, and the sort of reactive emotional survival mechanisms, when they're firing off, our rational mind goes offline. If you're getting chased down the road by a bear, you don't make a list, you run. And so that's a natural part of our brain that just reacts and responds in fight, flight, or freeze, only options. So when that's going off, we don't have access to our rational mind. One of the things about toxic relationships is that a toxic person will do a lot of little microaggressions. So they want control. They want you to act the way they want you to act. They want you to do what they want you to do and not do what they don't want you to do. So if you decide you want to go spend the afternoon with some girlfriends and they say, I guess you don't care about me the way I care about you, or fine, I don't care, or they ghost you for a couple of days or whatever, those are little microaggressions where they're training you to do what they want and do less of what they don't want. Over time, you start training yourself to do that and you lose track and you're always in fight, flight, freeze because you're always trying to second guess what's going to make them mad. So being in that fight, flight, freeze all the time, your rational mind is not there. It's very, very, a lot of people will say, I can't make a decision. I can't think straight. I can't even function at work anymore. That's true. That's true. It's really important that you validate, yes, that's true. So the goal is to calm down that survival emotional system, get back in your rational mind. And I do a lot of journaling in my work where I suggest, okay, journal all the stuff that's happened in this relationship. So you can't like, oh yeah, but it's like, no, this happened, then this happened, then this happened. This was terrible, that was terrible, all of that. And you journal it all out. And then you can look at it with your rational mind and go, wow, that's horrible. If my friend said they were going through that, I would tell them to be done. So clarity is the first step. And then the second step is leaving. And you don't always have to physically leave, but you've got to emotionally leave. You've got to emotionally learn to step back and watch that circus because their games and their antics and their control and their manipulation, it's all, I like to use the analogy. I don't know if you've ever been to Bass Pro Shop. You live in Utah, probably. And they've got like 1,000 different hooks and lures for the fish section. I'm not a fisher person. On the wall, tons of stuff to choose from. I sort of think of a narcissist brain like that. So they've got the guilt and a little bit of anger, and then they go for the sadness, and then they go for the martyr. I always do everything for everybody. Like there's just so many different hooks and lures. And if you emotionally step back and watch that circus, you can go, now they're using, okay, got it. And that helps you to separate from that and not take it personally and not take it on as yours. And when you do that, then you can have, again, more clarity.
So we've all known somebody that's in a relationship like this and who's just not ready. You try to talk to them, you maybe point it out, they get defensive. What do you do to move somebody towards some recognition and help them?
It's really hard when someone is not there because they can't see what they can't see. And also, it's really important to know that that emotional survival mind is feeding sort of self-escalating. So the emotions are feeding that survival reaction. That survival reaction is feeding that emotional freaking out. Bessel talks about it as a faulty fire alarm. So if you had a fire alarm that was going off all the time, but then didn't go off when you're burning the brownies and the oven's on fire, that's kind of what it's like inside the brain of somebody who's trauma bonded to somebody. And so it's really critical that you help them recognize you can still feel like you're in love with that person. It isn't love, it's attachment, but you can still feel like you're in love with that person and make the rational decision to leave or to separate or to whatever, to protect yourself. I even have coached a lot of people and counseled a lot of people who stayed for a long time, and I'll teach them how to have boundaries and see what happens. I'll say, I understand you've got 30 years in and kids together and all that. Let's see what happens when you set boundaries. Let's see what happens when you fully show up in this relationship. Have your thoughts, feelings, wants, and needs, and see what happens. And typically, first of all, they don't know what they think, feel, want, or need anymore because they've buried it in the other person for so many years. And then when they start to express it, then they get to see what happens. And truly, sometimes the other person will go, okay, fair enough. I don't want to lose you. But a lot of times you set a boundary or you show up fully and that person flips out and they implode and they explode and they make your life miserable. And you go, okay, I'm not allowed to fully exist in this relationship. Got it. So now I've got the full information. Now I know that to save my life, I've got to get out of this.
You said a word, trauma bond. Talk to us a little bit about that. What does that mean?
So it kind of goes back to what I was saying, where the person does these little microaggressions to sink the hook deeper, really, so that they, whenever, again, you do something they don't want you to do, like go out with friends or like take a break or like do anything for yourself, or even, sometimes they don't even want you to work or to have a life or to have friendships or anything or have interests. If you're not wholly focused on them, then they feed these little microaggressions out, just enough, just enough, just enough. And so you pull back from that, and then they love bomb you to make sure that they're hooking you. So that, if you start to pull away and go, I don't know about this relationship, then they're like, oh my gosh, you're my person, you're it, you're everything, and I couldn't live without you, and all that stuff. And so all those little microaggressions add up over time where you're literally afraid. You're afraid to be without them, and yet they're the most unsafe person in your life. So it's very much that flipped fire alarm. And then when you pull away from them, you feel terrified. And going back to them is more comfortable. Again, this is a template, so it's not comfortable at all. It's miserable. But people literally can't see the difference. And they will, I'll have clients and I'll just reflect back. You feel like that person is your safe space, and yet there's nothing in your life unsafe except them. Your work is great, your kids are great, all these things are really wonderful, and that person is not safe. And it's interesting that you feel the opposite, and then I'll teach them about the trauma bonding.
You've spoken a lot about uncovering limiting beliefs. Can you give us an example of that personally? It's something that you've found that was a limiting belief.
Oh boy, there were a lot of them in the beginning. In my 20s, I had a therapist who said, okay, I want you to Write down all the things that you say about yourself and to yourself for this week that are mean and awful and negative and derogatory. I'm like, oh, that's a dumb assignment, whatever. And so then I started to do it, and I'm like, holy smokes, this is not good. So we talk to ourselves like 70,000 times a day inside our own heads. So there isn't anybody on the planet that's more toxic to ourselves than ourselves. When we get into that negative mode, we have to fix that first. And those, they very much come from childhood, although somebody didn't necessarily say you are stupid or you're worthless or you're unlovable. But it's again what we feel and narrate from what happened. So if there are things that are chaotic and we feel like we're just in the background, our needs aren't met, then we feel unlovable. When just all those kinds of things. So the worthlessness, unlovability, all those different things. When you recognize, okay, that was my childlike interpretation of that incident in childhood. The reality is what? The reality is today, actually, I'm a kind, caring, empathic person. Actually, I have, really good friendships and really good family relationships, and I'm pretty smart and I'm funny. And, like you start to put together what's true about you, and those things are what survived, and that's uniquely you. Whereas the original stuff, it was either lies from childhood or it was interpretations as a child of what was going on in your life. So you can separate the lies from the truths. And those are the limiting beliefs that people live with forever. And a lot of times when you point those out to somebody and they recognize, their lives radically change. I mean, people can go from feeling suicidal to feeling like, oh, wow, yeah, I'm an important person in this world, and I'm grateful I survived and I can help others, just different things like that. That changes everything. And that's the root of real self-esteem. Our culture has it all backwards. It's not likes on Facebook or any of that garbage. It's character, and it's who you are as a person and what you value.
There's somebody that's listening to this that's stuck in a toxic situation. What is one belief or mindset shift you would just want to shout really clearly? One thing you'd say to them in that situation?
I would reflect to them that they are worth more than what they're living with, and that they are, I would ask them more about who they know themselves to be. And I would ask them, would you ever treat anybody the way you're being treated? And I would ask them how they would feel about their best friend or their mother, daughter, sister, brother, father being treated that way, and what they would say to them. And a lot of times, all of these questions are how we shift somebody into their rational mind. And then if they say, well, I still love that person, yeah, you might feel that. But your love comes from you. Like you are a loving person, and you love the stray cat on the street and the stray dog, and you love the stray person that, needs your love, but is now killing you, emotionally speaking. And we even now know that physically, our health is absolutely degraded by being around a toxic person. Like we can't survive it long term. It causes every ailment under the sun. That's another thing that Bessel talks about in his book. So I would say you're worth more and you don't deserve this, and talk with them about how they would talk to a friend who was going through this, and then to learn to be your own best friend instead of your own worst enemy.
Beautiful place to finish. Shannon, thank you so much for spending a little bit of time with us, and the work that you do to deconstruct toxic relationships and help people heal. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, Ken. It was a real pleasure.